They found it, you know.
First of all, I know some of y'all, I'm very casual and informal, meaning that if I say something that makes you think of a question or you have a question, don't hesitate, just, pop up, raise your hand, or even say, just say, hey, you, I have a question. So I want you to be able to do that. Also, I want to thank the city because a lot of companies or cities will sit and make you watch a videotape that's pretty boring.
We've done that too.
You know. So hopefully I'll be a little bit more entertaining than a videotape. How many of you are supervisors? Okay, good. Now, I want to talk about some issues that may affect you as a supervisor more so than if you're not. And I always make the joke that that's the reason why the supervisors get the big bucks. They have more duties, and of course everybody always doesn't think that's very funny. No problem. But the reason why I think it's important is because whenever we do get a lawsuit and they sue the city, it's not going to be the mayor that they're going to be taking a deposition of. It's going to be you. Because you're the one that's on the front line. You're the one that's involved, not the commissioners. So I think it's just important that you have the opportunity to have some training in case there is a situation. Because a lot of you may have never had any kind of guidance. In every type of business, your biggest issue is always going to be people. And that's part of the reason why I guess I have a job, because that's what I specialize in. But it doesn't matter. I was at a shipyard yesterday doing the same thing I'm doing now. And it doesn't matter if you're building a ship, running a city, whatever you're doing, you're going to have issues working with other people, because that's human nature. So what happens and how do people get sued, and what do we do to try to not get sued? Everybody nowadays knows about discrimination. People are, aware of it. It's an ever-changing situation, and part of that is because of the way our legal system works. Our legal system evolves. We evolve over time. So that there are things now that are illegal that used to not be. There used to not be discrimination based on having a disability. That didn't used to be illegal. I remember back when I was on crutches, if somebody called me a crip, that was too bad. That's the way it is. That's not true anymore. So we have to have these changes. Really, we all know that discrimination has to be based on what we call a protected category, one of which is a male or a female. Well, that pretty much covers everything. We don't have discrimination based on having a Dachshund versus a lab, but maybe in the future we will. But it's you have your male and female. One of the most common, I guess, is the racial. Can't treat people differently because of their race. And then over the years, we've added, we have religion. We see a little bit more of religion now. We used to not really see that. National origin, you can't treat somebody differently because they're from Iraq or Saudi Arabia. We also have now added age. Actually, though, you're considered to be old by the federal government if you're over 40. So when the legislatures enacted that law, they forgot about the boomers. So as a baby boomer, we're kind of going, good luck. But that's an area, and then of course disability. And connected to all that is what we call hostile environment. And that's kind of where we may get more action or more litigation. What do you do? How does that affect you? What we see where supervisors get in trouble is where they don't deal with it. have a situation brewing where there's trash talking, people picking on a person, and the supervisor isn't a bad person, but the supervisor just thinks, well, this will blow over, or, you know, it'll be all right. And I always make that point. A lot of the people in marriages will tell you the same thing, that one spouse thinks they can just let it blow over, and the other one will, you know, get over it. And we all know that does not work. They don't forget. It doesn't blow over. So I'll give you an example of a situation where it was another city, not this city, and it was the road and bridge, the street, you know, where they do the street repair. And they had a crew that was African American. They had worked together forever. They grew up together. They came from the same neighborhood. So they had been friends for many, many years, very tight. So the department hires a new worker. This worker was white. He was, I don't know what word to use, they're kind of worky. He didn't quite, you know, fit in with the group. And he really probably shouldn't have been hired, you know, but he was hired. So he was trying to buddy up with the crew. They didn't have anything, they didn't have anything to do with it. And anyway, long story short, he realizes he's going to get fired. So what does he do? And that we see this a lot. He runs to the EEOC. The EEOC is the Equal Opportunity Commission, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. It's a federal agency. And he goes and runs to them and says, you know, I'm having to work in an environment where I have to hear the N-word. Now, the crew had been calling each other the N-word. And when I interviewed them, they were mad. How dare that guy? How dare he? He wasn't part of our conversation. We weren't talking to him. What the hell is he doing eavesdropping on us? We've been calling each other this since we were little children. They were mad. But that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's not acceptable in the workplace, even if they didn't care. And it's an interesting, I like to share this because you don't have to be the African American complaining. This was a white guy. But he knew it was wrong. And the supervisor was very aware. And he kind of didn't think anything of it because they were all, you know, buds and friends, and they weren't using it in a even though it's a terrible word, they didn't feel like they were using it in a critical way. That's just what they were doing. But the supervisor knew. And you can't win that. You cannot win that. And it ended up being a financial settlement. And of course, when that kind of thing happens, the supervisor doesn't look very good. The mayor's not very happy with the situation. So one of the things you have to do and remember as a supervisor is you're the parent. And when the kids, the other employees, and I don't mean this detrimentally, I mean it positively, when they start acting up, cutting up, doing and saying things, you have to say something and do something. The worst thing you can do is do nothing. That right there. There is no rule book that you open up and said, okay, when this person says this, we must do that. There isn't. But what there is you've got to do something. Because if you don't do anything, you look horrible. I mean, can you imagine this supervisor being on the witness stand or being his deposition taken and going, okay, you're aware that your people are talking like this? You think that's okay? Well, they didn't mind. How do you know? What if somebody walks up and hears this? This is acceptable language for you? You think this is okay? You think this is right? You know, you can see what I'm saying. You can be made to look horrible. So the message is, if you don't remember anything else I say, that's the most important message to remember. You're fortunate that you have an HR department. That's good. Some places don't have that. If you have a situation brewing or a situation that could be an issue, I always say, get the ball out of your court. Throw the ball over there. Because then you have protection that you have asked for help. And we see that. I've seen that here. I've seen that here. Where a supervisor, well-meaning, thought he was doing okay. He basically called in the workers. They were doing trash talking. They were giving somebody a hard time, referring to a disability. And he thought he was doing the right thing. He called them all in and said, this is, against our policies. Don't talk like this. Handed them all the policy. And guess what they did? They went right back to it. Right back to it. And he knew it. He knew it. So that equals condoning it. That equals saying, I think it's okay to give somebody a hard time. Never called HR. Never got, support. And I just don't understand why people don't do that. I think people don't realize they can do that. I don't think people realize sometimes they can reach out and get some backup. Because then you can say, HR got involved, we're here to help. You're not out there by yourself. It's an issue. We see people a lot of times harassing others, and it's not really about the fact that they're a different race or have a disability. It's because they don't get along or they're not doing their job. One particular incident, an all-male crew, a typical male job. They hired a woman into the job, which of course is, proper. But she really wasn't capable of doing the job. And so instead of the supervisor working with her, counseling her, letting her know she wasn't doing the job and she needed, to step up, they didn't do anything. So guess what's happening? The other workers start to resent her because they're carrying the load. They start to resent her, and so what do? They start to pick her. Not because she's a woman, but because they're resentful because she's not carrying her load. It doesn't really matter why they're doing it. They're doing it, and now they're doing it, and we now have a situation where we have a potential lawsuit. So as a supervisor, it's very important, and I don't mean to exclude non-supervisors here, but it's important that we make sure that we are giving people counseling and input on their jobs. I know everybody hates writing people up. Nobody likes to be written up. And it's like, why do we have to write people up? Well, there's a couple reasons. One of the reasons is because if we're in court, juries like paper. And they like to know that a person has been given an opportunity to improve. They like that. That's human nature. I want to know that you gave the person the opportunity to do better. They continue to screw up, and they get a warning again, and they keep on screwing up. And you know what? We all know there's a lot of people out there that could use a good job. You obviously don't take your job seriously. You don't need to be here if this is how you feel about your job. Now, for those of you that are workers, you don't need to view a write-up as somebody's out to get you, but rather an opportunity to see if there's a way that you can improve on your behavior or your performance. It's human nature to not think that you have an issue with your work performance. So all of a of a sudden, if I get let go and everybody else is the male, and a lot of human nature must be because I'm a woman, which of course is BS. I'm the speaker, so I can use BS, but you can't. No, instead, if I had been given up and given guidance, then in the back of my mind, I can think what I want, but the truth is I know I didn't do what I needed to do. Discrimination comes from unequal treatment because of someone's race, national origin, sex, gender, disability, religion. In other words, we should all be neutral in how we treat people. Now, people are all different, but we want to be treated fairly. I always tell supervisors that when you have, if you look at it like a stern parent that's fair, employees do not mind rules as long as they're consistently applied. That's it in a nutshell. They like boundaries. People want to know what the rules are. What they don't want is to be treated differently. And you and I both know that everybody here knows everything. They all know. There are no secrets in the workplace. If somebody else gets away with something, the rest of the group knows it. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to do that. It's a lot easier when you're busy and tired. You know, oh well, it'll work out. And it doesn't. So it's very important that we do that. I mean, I did a training for the county years ago, and one of the big issues was one of the department could have casual Friday, and the other one couldn't. Now, you wouldn't think that would be a big deal. Giant deal. Giant. Because people keep score. They keep score. One of the areas of discrimination that we really always recommend, if you have an issue with it, is the disability stuff. It's very tricky. One of the things I see happening now is that because of these HIPAA laws and medical privacy laws, I can remember when it used to be common practice if someone had a heart attack or, heaven forbid, or cancer or whatever it was, a lot of the employees would want to, get together and have a thank you note, or not thank you, but get well, and they would get very involved with it. And of course now, we live in a different world. It's like, we're not supposed to be discussing other people's medical conditions. So that gets kind of tricky. I had a refinery where they had an employee that went out on for cancer treatment, and he gets treatment, and he comes back, and he's supposed to be operating the board, and they watch they call them board operators, and I don't know where his mind was, but all of a sudden the temperatures spiked up to the sky. He did not blow the plant up, but he could have, and that kind of situation is zero tolerance, so they fired him. So he goes to the EEOC and files a lawsuit saying that he's been terminated because he had cancer. He's got a disability, and there's no question, cancer is considered a disability. Well, the supervisor had no idea why he went out. The supervisor that terminated him, he didn't get involved with his medical condition. HR handled his paperwork, but the supervisor didn't get into the middle of it. So he couldn't have made that decision because he didn't even know. So I share that just to give you an understanding as to why we don't need to get involved with all of that. Yes?
That's an interesting topic because some of us work in the field where a fitness for duty can be detrimental to the individual job performance. What aspect, I know under civil service we have certain things that can apply to that, but what's your recommendation on that?
And that's a great question. You are civil service, so that's going to be a separate situation, but I think that's a great topic. In fact, I was just talking about this yesterday because at the shipyard, it's a very physical job. And under disability law, let me give you just a little background. We used to not really have detailed job descriptions. What do we do now? Because of the disability laws. Disability laws say that you cannot be discriminated against for your disability as long as you can perform the essential functions of the job with or without accommodation. Now, what does that mean? First of all, that means that you got to be able to do your job. So that's why we list requirements, fitness for duty. If I'm in an office sitting down, I don't need to be able to lift 25 pounds or run over an obstacle course. That's not an essential function of my job. If I put that in a job description because I want to keep out certain people, it can be struck down. Because people at a desk, under most circumstances, don't need to be able to run and lift. Obviously, officers do. There used to be, years ago, a restriction on height for officers, and of course that was struck down because that didn't really fit with a fit for duty requirement. But that is why we do it, and that is why we have these requirements, because it is a part of the job that you have to be able to meet those. Now, with or without accommodation, that gets kind of sticky, and a lot of times employers will screw up on that part of it, because the law requires you to at least look at an accommodation. Doesn't mean you have to. You have to at least look at it. For example, I've got a chemical plant where they have operators, and they also have the big trucks come in and they have to unload. That's part of their job. Well, they don't like that part. And when they unload, they have to wear a safety harness. So one of the individuals, he'd been there, employee, been there for a while, he gained a bunch of weight, and he no longer was within the safety range of the capacity for the harness. Okay? So you don't want to reward, in other words, he gets to get out of that part of the job because that's going to create resentment with everyone else because they're having to. On the other hand, OSHA says I got to have a safe environment here. I can't be putting people in safety equipment that they don't, it doesn't work for them. So we had to look at an accommodation, which is, can we find another safety harness that will support his weight? And we see the same thing with ladders, when people get really heavy, and that sort of thing. Did that kind of answer it or not? No?
We could talk about that all day long, so yes.
Well, the other thing about fitness for duty, and it does come up with a new thing we're having is prescription drugs is another new area. And I don't want to spend all the time talking about that, but it's an ever-changing, evolving situation. And in the past, we all know about drug testing, but that tests for illegal drugs, not prescription drugs. Certain industries, it's an issue. If I'm in an office setting, it's done by beeswax, who's on Xanax, okay? Maybe they need to be on Xanax. But if I'm operating machinery, then it's a different issue. So, and obviously if you're an officer and you're running around and, it's another issue. But these are areas that we have to fine tune. There's a recent case the EEOC took on, you may have read about it, which had to do with weight. Always before, weight has never been considered what we call a protected status, meaning religion, sex, gender, disability. Well, weight, I predicted this for years. I've been predicting this is going to happen because it's an issue that is affecting people. Now, under the Disability Act, they amended it, and it now includes what's considered morbidly obese. That does not mean, the Christmas pounds you gain and that's morbidly obese. The case that's going up right now is a business in Houston. They had an individual who had been there. He had, I think he was 475. I mean, we're talking about very, very big. And he parked in the parking lot, and it took him a while to get to the building. Of course, he wasn't getting paid for that. He hadn't clocked in yet. And he had a desk job. And his boss, they really screwed it up because, I think that what they were probably thinking is he's going to affect our insurance. But they set him down and they said, we're going to let you go. You take too long to walk across the parking lot. Well, guess what? They're going to lose that because it's walking across the parking lot has nothing to do with his job at his desk. Now, if you're a police officer, that's a different matter. But that's what we're seeing, yes.
But what if they hired me at 120 pounds and I'm doing my job and I'm on a job for 3 or 4 years and then I go to 225 or 300. Now it's affecting what I started, when they hired me.
Right.
So, take the case of the obese. Did they hire him when he was huge? Or did he get huge during the course of the job?
He gained. I think he was a large guy to begin with, but he had gained. He had gained a bunch of weight. We see this. This is an issue. It makes a difference on what you do. The chemical plants, the refineries, they all have a safety issue. Okay, there's a safety issue. For example, recently, y'all may have heard there was a woman that they wouldn't let board the airplane because of her weight. The response back from the plane or the airline was that she had trouble, she couldn't get on. And so their issue is, well, that if she can't get on, what about getting off? It could affect the rest of the passengers if she couldn't get off and there was an emergency. So anytime we have a safety issue, it makes a difference. If it's not a safety issue, it's a performance issue, and that's got nothing to do with weight or anything else. It's simply a performance issue. If you can't perform, then you have an issue. Some of the companies I've seen that have had employees that have been there for a while and they gained a bunch of weight, particular one with the safety harness, they couldn't find a harness that handled his weight, wasn't physically out there, but they actually gave him time to lose. So, they worked with him. I had somebody yesterday ask me about boots. And what they do, apparently, they have some of their welding, they don't have to wear boots, but some of the welding, they're around hazardous chemicals, and they have to wear boots. Of course, nobody wants to do that part of the job. And they had a fellow that had really, really large feet. I can't remember now what the size was. I want to say 18, but that might not be right. But it was a big foot. And of course, that's not considered a disability, having big feet. At least it's not right now. Maybe. But I said, guys, get on the internet and see if you can find what it costs. Now, if you have to pay $10,000 to have a mold to make a boot, then that's not reasonable. But otherwise, go see if you can find one. So, but it's very interesting. It's a very interesting area. If you have an issue as a supervisor involving anything like that, I really strongly urge you to get some help because it can be a little tricky. Questions? Yes. Right.
In an academic setting, we have a lot of training that we have to deal with. And cultural diversity, race, sex, all that comes up in our training. When the instructor says right up front, you're going to be offended in my training, it's part of what the training is, talking about race, talking about that sort of thing. And he sets that, or she sets that tone up front. Can one of the students be legally offended by the conversations or the talk that goes on in that academic setting.
And that's another good question. I hate it when lawyers say it depends, but, you know, and that example where we see that is the Alzheimer's units. Alzheimer's units, unfortunately, a lot of people with Alzheimer's will get very nasty in terms of their comments. I mean, we're talking about vicious racial comments, sexual comments, and they are told that's part of their job, that they're going to have to deal with that. You know, that's just, they don't know what they're saying and deal with it. As far as training goes, you know, setting aside the legal part of it, I don't know how effective training that is, because you don't want to immediately put the thought in somebody's brain they're going to be offended. That's like setting you up to already be offended. And I don't know why you would say that. There's a way to talk about cultural differences without being offensive. Now, if somebody is offended, then the way that works is the law considers this to be a world full of stuff that people could be offended by. So they believe there is an obligation on the part of the individual to let their co-workers know. Now, if you say, I'm offended because you call me stupid, and you keep calling me stupid, then you're purposely harassing me. But if someone says, I'm offended by your training, you know, they're not going to be, the EEOC is not going to get that excited about that. Now, if they're the only woman in the group, and it's very not necessary to be that offensive, if there's been a pattern, then that's different. I mean, we call it stray remarks. You know, there's a couple stray remarks here or there, but I think the attitude of I'm going to offend you, so get ready, is you know, I wouldn't advise going about it that way. But we always say that if you have a boss that's an equal opportunity, is treated the same. It's everybody gets given a hard time. You know, South Park, that show, they go after everything. But that's just terrible management. You know, we never want to ever do that. I will caution you to really think about what you say, because people nowadays can tape record you. That is not allowed under your manual, correct? Correct. But people can still try to do that, and without you knowing it. In Texas, if you're part of the conversation, and then you officers correct me, but if you're part of the conversation, it's not illegal. You can't leave a tape recording device at someone's office and not physically be present. That's considered a criminal violation. But you can if you're part of the conversation. So just in the back of your mind, you probably should always think about how you are sounding and what you're saying. Would you want your child to hear you talk that way? Would you want your mother or your mother-in-law to hear you speaking in that way? It's just good to remember about that. And I always have in group, I can't do anything anymore. This is ridiculous. Everything's, wrong. I used to tell the training that I had a training where I used the word powwow, and I had an American Indian participant that told me that was an offensive word. And somebody else goes, that's ridiculous, you can't do anything, you can't say anything, what's wrong with this world, blah, 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 the federal government. Well, you know what? I can't go jogging at night because I could get a cost. I don't jog anyway, but I can't go walking at night. It's the reality. It's the world we live in. We are crowded. We live in a crowded time. You spend 80% of your time at work. If you cannot say something that makes everybody calmer, what's the big deal? What's the big deal? If you want to do that, do it in the privacy of your home. Remember though, if you go out after work with a bunch of your co-workers or even more so if you're a supervisor, you can get in trouble for that. if you do something, even though you're not physically on the city's property. A lot of people don't know that. Remember, it can come up. I felt like I had to go out with my supervisor, and he hit on me the whole time we were at the bar. Saying, he goes, blah, blah, blah. I've seen it. So, you have to just be sorry, but I'm always here to remind everybody to, tone it down. Questions? It's kind of like gardening. When you don't mow the yard, it gets real hard to mow it. If you go out there and mow it regularly, you keep it under control. If you monitor your words and you monitor your environment, it's a lot easier. You let it get out of control, it's hard to rein it back in. It's hard to do that. And what you're doing is giving people an opportunity to go after you. That's what you're doing. If they get mad or they know or whatever, then they'll remember what all was said and done. Whenever somebody gets fired and they're mad, they go home and get on the internet, they type in wrongful discharge, or wrongful termination, or I got fired, and boom, all these lawyers pop up. And they all say, free consultation. And then they go, they talk to the person, and the person, my boss, I was late to work and he fired me. Well, did he ever make a comment about the fact that you're Hispanic or Asian? Well, no, but have you ever heard any jokes? Well, actually, some of the people call each other Nacho and Taco and this and that. And was your supervisor there? Well, yeah. Did he do anything? No. You know what I'm saying? They start to pick out every little thing that could be something that could be made out of something. So that's why I strongly urge people not to do and say things. I used to do this about sexual harassment. That used to be the big deal. And then, we still see it. We just saw Trash, the highest guy you can get in the CIA. And here we go, having an affair. So people are going to be people. We still see that. We don't see as much of the, hey baby, trying to make a move on women. We seem to see more now, kind of just more trash talk in general. I mean, I have cases where the guys were giving each other a hard time, calling each other queer, gay. They weren't, they were straight, but that was the way to pick. Yes?
But then there's another law.
Yes.
Is coming down the pike. I know I'm under it already. The rights of gays and lesbians.
Yes.
Sexually orientated discrimination.
Good question, good point. Thank you for bringing that up. Absolutely, it's no question. What we call same-sex harassment is definitely illegal in Texas. It used to not be. If I harassed Rachel, it used to be that Rachel could not sue me. She wouldn't, but now she can. Same-sex harassment is illegal. What's coming down the pipes is transgender, meaning changing your sex. We get heavily influenced by California law. I know that might be surprising because people think California, their people are crazy. But yes, Texas does get influenced by California. And California, it's already illegal to discriminate against transgender, and it is definitely coming. So again, it's about putting somebody down to have a laugh. There's just no reason to get off on making somebody else uncomfortable, making somebody else have a rise, making them irritated. That's harassment. And that's what we don't want to ever do. I don't see that. If I looked at my lawsuits, there's a percentage of that where they're just flat out wrong and giving somebody a hard time, they shouldn't have done it and all that. But a lot of it is just mishandling the situation. I see more of that than I actually do the bad actors. And where they just kind of, like I said, blow it off or not look at it. But yeah, the transgender thing is obviously going to be a big deal. We already have people calling about the bathroom situation. Some of that is just about being sensitive. Person going through the sex change certainly doesn't, most of them are not trying to aggravate the rest of the group, but yet they're told they need to use the women's restroom, and then, the women are then like, what are you doing? So, but some of that's just, you just call Rachel and we work you through and we deal with it. Again, the worst thing you can do in those situations is just go too bad, figure it out for yourself. We want to always have people know that we care. We don't necessarily, can't really maybe fix it, but we are interested in listening, and we will certainly give them our attention. We spend most of our life at our job. It's a huge part of who we are, and it's a profound part of who we are. People that are let go, it's a very traumatic situation, not just financially. So that's why we have to really, think about how we interact with each other. Okay. Is there a particular? That's want to keep me going on something. Okay. Governments have a little bit different rules than private industry. Private industry is they don't get sued for what we call whistleblowing or First Amendments. First Amendment right is your freedom of speech, and private industry does not have that. And a lot of people don't realize that, but they don't. Private industry, private company, I get rid of everybody that voted for whoever. Too bad, that's my right. But if I'm a government, I can't take it out on people because of that. We see cases where the new, I don't know, I would say the sheriff, the new district clerk will get hired, and they'll get rid of the people that campaigned against them, And I see that, especially in smaller places. And of course, you can't do that. One of the things you have to be concerned about here, of course, is what we call whistleblowing. A lot of employees will sometimes